welcome to another video from the Tiny Menagerie. Of all the bottom-dwelling fish kept in this wonderful hobby, I would be willing to put good money on the fact that Corydoras are the most popular. And of all the various cories that there are out there, Sterbai are likely to be one of the most popular of those. And that is not surprising, considering what beautiful patination they show, with this lovely soft brownish grey base coloration with a cream overlay that creates a network of stripes, spots and reticulations over their body. And all of this contrasting beautifully with those peachy orange fins. But obvious beauty aside, what are Sterbai like to keep and what kind of setup do they need? Well, like all of the other cories, Sterbais originate from South America, and particularly around the river Guapore in Brazil, where they congregate in large shoals that can be hundreds or even thousands strong. This being the case, you will want to maintain at least 4 Sterbai in a group in your tank, just so that they have the company of their own kind, and although they do get along just fine with all of the other cory species, like the peppers and the pandas, they do need their own specific species for company, and so you'll need 4 Sterbai, and not 1 Sterbai, 1 pepper, 1 bronze, and so on. And while I have found that Sterbais are perhaps not quite as committed to shoaling as some of the other cory species, especially the pygmies for example, they do still spend a lot of time in each other's company, and they certainly seem to prefer to rest together in a group, presumably as that gives them safety in numbers. When it comes to their tank, Sterbais do need some variety, as they like to be both out in the open searching for food, but they also like to be able to retire somewhere that is dark in order to rest. And so they do need either a rocky ledge or some curved pieces of wood, anything really that can provide them with darkness and the shelter that they crave. And I have found that if they don't have that place to hide, then they can become rather skittish, and they will try to cling around decorations and plants, whereas if they do have somewhere they can retire to, they are much more brave overall. As for the substrate in their tank, they do like to root around in sand, looking for detritus worms and such like, although I have found they are perfectly happy snuffling around on gravel as well. Basically, Sterbais are pretty tolerant, they just like a range of places to be and things to do. When it comes to water quality, Sterbais are far less picky and they will happily live in a wide range of temperatures, from 22 degrees right up to 28, and that does mean they can be kept even with those much more challenging species like discus, who prefer very much warmer water to a lot of other species. They can also live in a pH that is anywhere between 6 and 8, and they really don't care about water flow neither. They can happily live in the fastest of flows or even a tank that has very little flow. This being the case, of course, it does mean that Sterbai can live with a huge range of other tropical fish. In fact, they can live with all but the absolute outliers, just so long as those tankmates aren't large enough to eat them. But any of the smaller tetras, angelfish or danios make perfect tankmates for Sterbais, and they even get on well with the very boisterous fish, such as the larger barbs. This is because cories just don't have any of the weaknesses or temptations that other fish have. They don't have flowing fins or contrasting fin tips. This makes them rather boring as far as other fish are concerned, and so the cories get left in peace. Sterbai Corydoras are only a small catfish. They only grow up to about 2 to 3 inches, with females being fractionally longer and a good deal wider than the males are. But while they are relatively small for a catfish, Sterbai are relatively big for a cory, as they have a very squat and wide body shape that gives them an extremely solid appearance. A bit like a brick with a tail really, and so they do feel larger in the tank compared to similar sized species. Even bronze cories, who are about the same length as a Sterbai, feel much smaller in the tank because they're much more streamlined. This being the case, while 4 Sterbai can live very comfortably in an 80 cm length of tank, any more than that and it can start to look a bit full of fish. And as cories don't utilise any other level of the tank, they are purely bottom dwellers, then it is the base dimensions of the tank that matters above anything else. Despite being that little bit bigger though, Sterbai cories are just as harmless as all their other cousins. They have no interest at all in harming other fish. They don't nip fins, they don't chase smaller fish. In fact, while they would be perfectly happy to eat any eggs that they came across, cories are perfectly safe to keep even in with the littlest of fish fry, just so long as they are fully free swimming. And they can also live alongside shrimp, neocaridiners or caridinas. They might occasionally manage to eat a very, very tiny little shrimplet that has just been born, but in general, because sterbai hunt by pushing their face along a surface, and they don't have the fastest of reaction times, they tend to just nudge any shrimp out of the way. And so they can be kept in with a colony and it will still be able to grow. Feeding Sterbai cories does take a little bit of extra thought, as they are bottom dwellers and so they do prefer a sinking food such as pellets, and you will need to make sure that their food is actually reaching down to the substrate and not just being gobbled up by all of the fish in the waters overhead. They'll take pretty much any food that reaches down to them though, including any of the leftover flake foods or frozen foods from fish above, and they'll also take any live worms like bloodworms or anything like that you can give them as well. Also, just to point out, if you can find good quality live feed for them, then I have found sterbais to be one of the easiest cories to breed. And once they do start laying eggs in the tank, they will do so every single day for weeks at a time, and the fry are large and easy to raise as well. Just one thing though, if you are thinking about breeding your sterbais, is that they can take an annoying amount of time to reach sexual maturity. Mine didn't even start to think about breeding until they were nearly 2 years old. Now while this is fairly common for cories, they often take at least a year before they reach sexual maturity, sterbais just seem to be that little bit slower than everybody else. Overall though, Sterbai cories are a very easygoing and simple species to keep. So long as they have a setup that includes both places with sand where they can look for food and somewhere that's dark where they can hide, then they are generally very hardy and suffer from very few complaints. Anywho though, I hope you've enjoyed this little video all about Sterbai Corydoras. Happy fish keeping everyone, and I will see you again soon. Bye bye!